Everybody. I see there's a couple people waiting to get in as well, Amanda. So I'll wait for them just real quick.
I'm not seeing any waiting. Oh, here we go. Got him.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you everybody for being here. Today is August 17th. It's 11 a.m. and we have the Cannabinoid Subcommittee of the House Bill 3000 Task Force. And I am looking forward to our discussion today. Amanda, would you be willing to start with attendance? I know I welcome Senator Hansel. I see you here with us today. I'm glad to have you.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Yep, I'll go ahead and start. Representative Morgan.
I'm not here. I mean, wait, I'm physically here.
Senator Hansel.
Present by video.
Rob.
Present by video.
Courtney.
Hey, Moran, present by video. Good morning.
Nat.
Amanda, I didn't hear the last name you called.
Oh, Matt Cyrus. I don't think he's here yet.
Okay.
Jay.
Present by video.
Amanda Metzler said she'd be about a half hour late. Brent. Oh, you're still on mute, but I can see you.
Sorry, present.
Andre.
Present.
And Steve. I don't think he's here yet either. All right.
And Brent, I'm sorry, we hear the music in the background, so I'm gonna try to keep you muted. There, thank you. All right, did we get through everybody, Amanda?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm excited about today. We have the opportunity to hear from a couple industry partners, but let's see. Is that where we're starting today? Yep, it looks like we're gonna just go straight into those presentations. Is that correct, Amanda?
Yes, we have two lab representatives with us today. We have Kelly from Columbia Labs and Eric from Greenleaf Labs. So Kelly, if you wanted to go ahead and start and just talk about the considerations around the testing requirements.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me, everyone. I am here on behalf of Columbia Laboratories. A little bit of background as well. Columbia Laboratories has been testing for the food and feed industries as well as environmental for the state of Oregon and Washington for the last 35 years. So we work with a lot of regulated industries for consumer safety practices. We were the first laboratory certified in Oregon to be testing for recreational cannabis. And since the Farm Bill went live, we have largely expanded our services into national and international testing requirements for our hemp clients. We still serve the Oregon marijuana industry as well for testing services. Due to the nature of our experience in working in several other regulated, safety heavy industries, as well as the work that we've done with international and national hemp manufacturers and producers, we have some key insights about the regulations that are being discussed for testing of the products themselves, and then also some testing considerations for tracking the products as well. So just want to give you a bit of background there. I have not been on this subcommittee, so I'm a guest here, but as the business representative for Columbia Laboratories, I am also on the board with the Oregon Industrial Hemp Farmers Association, We also are very active members of ASTM's D37 Cannabis Committee, which is actively creating standards for best practices and scientific methods for cannabis and hemp products throughout the entire world. We're also heavily involved in the American Herbal Products Association dietary supplements based out of botanicals Cannabis Committee, and we also are very active in AOAC developing methods for microbial contaminants for cannabis products as well. So lots of fun projects that we get to do, of course, here at Columbia. And I've also had the pleasure of working with the OLCC, OHA, and ODA. Nice to see everyone here in the last few years as we're trying to hash all this out, right? So, so there's really great people on this call, but my interactions lately have led us to see that, one, there's not a lot of testing representation on these subcommittees. There's really no scientific voice that we're seeing to help to guide very technical aspects of the program. That being said, we are noting that there's some key topics that we've been going over and over again in some of the groups that I'm a part of, including the track and trace. So one of the key components that we're discussing today is I believe the cannabinoid testing program and whether or not the hemp industry is going to be regulated license-wise as well as testing-wise through various agencies here in Oregon. There's a lot that goes into that. So I'd like to first and foremost state that we absolutely feel like the best practice for Oregon to regulate these compounds would be to require higher levels of accreditation and certification for manufacturers and processors, all requiring licensing within the state of Oregon. We see this working in multiple other states, and it's definitely in line as well with the developing FSMA requirements for traceability for any food type product that's going into the market. We believe that there needs to be a separation between cannabis and hemp in the regulatory pathways. We work with some of the largest vertically integrated clients in the country, some based here out of Oregon, and all of the ones that we work with here in Oregon are CGMP certified. So these are large scale manufacturers, and they're not just selling into the Oregon market. These guys are selling into international markets. They're selling into Japan. They're moving products from the United States into Romania and then shipping them into Australia. So this is much, much, much bigger integration than just here in Oregon. I've seen the development of regulations pushing certification programs such as GMP on the manufacturers and processors being very successful for several reasons. One reason is that it takes some of the pressure and responsibility off of our regulatory agencies. So requiring independent companies to manage their quality control programs has been tough. And I think there's a lot of gaps there so far that we're trying to reconcile. But we are seeing that other states and federally are leaning towards just raising the bar on accreditation certifications, such as New York, for hemp products. The reason why we pushed for this is because this is a system that will ensure the safety and of the products themselves. It's not tracking the products or regulating the products, it's more so regulating the process. And this is the crux of consumer safety. We need to be regulating that all of the processors and handlers and manufacturers are having batch traceability records. They're all working to comply with the testing regulations. They're all working to train their employees, to have clean facilities, to have SDS sheets about toxic chemicals. This is all required under GMP, but not all required under the metric track and trace. Metric is awesome because it helps to regulate diversion and it helps to regulate the products themselves, but it doesn't necessarily regulate the facilities, the cleanliness of the facilities, or a lot of the safety practices that are required for like FSMA regulations on food integrated products as well. So we see that trending in that direction, and that's one of the reasons for the recommendation. That being said, I think that if we go into metric, it's going to be a huge regression for any company that's trying to operate based out of Oregon, as they're competing against other states that are, again, shipping internationally and things like that. I'd like to give a quick example of how batch traceability and independent management of a CGMP certified facility can be very successful, and how our regulators can use this as a huge bonus for you guys to have to manage less and be able to enforce your policies with more efficacy. The gap, I think, is
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wasn't expecting you to be talking about tracking and tracing. And looking at what was offered, it was testing methods, parameters for consistency, results, replication, and standards. That's what you had said that you would be presenting on, and also reference laboratory and stuff. So I just want to make sure that we're sticking on topic of what was expected.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Rep Morgan. I appreciate that. Yeah, there's like 4 different topics that have been floating around that I've been asked to comment on and things like that. So that was the opening, but I can absolutely jump into the method references. So it's kind of in the same vein, actually. So it's whether you're regulating the product or regulating the process. So there's some proposals put out about regulating a standardized method. California has proposed this in particular to help to reduce the inconsistencies of the testing variances that are out there for these products, to create more consistency among the labs, right? And that's great. There has been inconsistencies with testing, but there's some inherent variances that are within the testing. So that's important to know. And also, regulating the method is similar to regulating the product and not the process. So what we would encourage, rather than regulating a standard method across the board for all products that every lab has to use, we don't think this is going to fix any of the testing inconsistencies. Putting more pressure on auditing proficiency testing and also a secret shopper program are the best ways to enforce the testing irregularities that you see from lab to lab. So it's exciting to hear that the ODA is instituting a reference laboratory. So looking forward to seeing that come to fruition. I think that if there is a strong emphasis on precision and validating methods, which is really missing in a lot of the testing laboratories enforcement oversight, is the validation of all of the methods and the precision. That way they can modify the method as needed to give the best, most precise results. However, you have to prove that you can give precise results over and over and over again. So given that we're on track to get a reference laboratory, if you can also combine that with a secret shopper program, that's a huge recommendation too. This helps the self-regulated market stay in check. I think that's what's been really missing, has been the lack of enforcement and checks and balances. We have all the testing regulations laid out through the OHA. We're all supposed to be doing something a certain way, but there's gaps in the enforcement that are allowing for people to operate in a gray area and not adhere to a lot of those requirements. So if there's a secret shopper program where products are pulled from the shelf and tested at a testing laboratory, that is the standard testing laboratory for the ODA, and they test wildly out of specification, that will cause an investigation or an audit of said laboratory or the handler in question as well. So, it's very difficult to regulate testing laboratories. I'm sure, ORLAP does a great job with the accreditation services, but the lack of enforcement has been really difficult, I think, for the testing labs to compete that are only doing cannabis services as well. So we highly encourage a secret shopper program, a standardized reference laboratory that we can use for that secret shopper program, and an emphasis on proficiency reports as well as validation practices for the testing laboratories, in addition to the already required testing parameters. So that's that topic.
Well, great. Let's pause there and see if there's any questions. I also, Amanda, I'm sorry, I do see somebody is logged in by phone. I don't know if that's one of our committee members or somebody from the public.
I think it's probably somebody from the public.
Okay, that's fine. Who is that?
Well, I don't know if you show me. I'm Matt Cyrus. I don't know if you show me as logged in by phone or via Zoom.
Oh, that was Matt Cyrus. So he's with
Okay,
us.
so yeah, Matt, we have you by phone. So I know I have a couple questions, but I want to make sure to open up for other people that have any questions before I get there. So if you have a chance to raise your hand, Matt, you'll just have to kind of beep in and we'll let you know when it's you. Oh, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah. Quick question. What's the acceptable margin of error on the existing testing protocol?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I wanted to include as well some of the work we've been doing with ASTM. So ASTM sets international standards for all types of industry, like everything from concrete now to cannabis, right? And these are best practices as well as testing standards. So right now we're working on a standard for testing laboratories for cannabis and the reporting requirements they have to put on to their lab reports. And we're adding measurement of uncertainty as one of the reporting requirements for lab reports, which I think we should do everywhere, which is why it's becoming an ASTM standard. Measurement of uncertainty depends on the type of product that we're testing, and every lab has a different measurement of uncertainty. That's literally telling you like how precise the testing can be on a product. So, you know, the range of analytical accuracy. In general, I would say there is a measurement of uncertainty of about 10% RPD on concentrates in general. And that's an RPD, a relative percent difference. So it's not just tacking 10% on either side of the concentration. It's 10% of that concentration number. So for example, if your concentration goals were 10%, you had a 10% measurement uncertainty RPD, 8 to 12% would be considered analytically accurate for that range of numbers as well. So it's different per lab, it's different per product, and it should be required on test reports to list the measurement of uncertainty. The reason why, Rep Morgan, is because a lot of the regulations that we have behold manufacturers and processors to test within a very, very small margin, right? Like milligrams per grams of potency analysis for these products. But the testing inherently has an analytical range of accuracy. And there's a few instances where that range of inaccuracy overlaps the requirements for the labeling for the manufacturers, and that can put them in a spot where they're testing out of compliance, even though the laboratories are technically doing everything correct. So there are some gaps in the regulations, and that's why I believe Matt brought up the question of measurement of uncertainty for testing laboratories.
Matt, did you have a follow-up?
No, that was addressing my comment at our last meeting, the fact that you could have people based on an accurate test that the margin of uncertainty could put somebody out of compliance or potentially subject them to legal problems, even though their product may be okay, but just the acceptable lab tests were allowed too much margin.
Okay, and so Brent?
Hi, yeah, Kelly, I'm just kind of curious if there's a particular state where some of these concepts are actually happening now, as far as the, you know, the secret shopper and those kind of concepts of keeping an eye on things. Is there somewhere that's all of these things are working right now, more so obviously than Oregon? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, totally, Brent. I think it's that time in cannabis's life where we kind of put our big boy pants on. This is done in other industries, right, all across the board, but it's not so much done in hemp or cannabis per se. The reason why is we have training wheels given to us by metric and regulations of best practices and all these things that we have to do, but in other industries, they don't have those training wheels, right? Even in more strictly DEA regulated pharmaceutical industries, they don't have these training wheels of best practices, right? And the way that most industries are regulating themselves is that they maintain their own stuff, and then they are tested against. And if there's any cause at all, like your competitor went out and bought your stuff and tested it at the reference laboratory, or the auditors did that or something, and it causes reason to bring that to light, that is how it's regulated in pretty much every other industry. Is it working well in cannabis? cannabis in every state is trying to do something to help to mitigate these issues, but has not to pull their heads out of the circle of our training wheels and focus on ways that we could advance the industry beyond just state compliance regulations. So it is sort of a proposed answer to the problem without a direct example in the cannabis industry, but with many successful examples in supplements, in food and beverage,
ship them either.
things like that. So hopefully that answers
So
your question.
right
I know
now-
that, yeah, go ahead.
So right now, this is a conceptual thing where you guys are kind of putting out some suggestions that could work as far as information. This isn't anything that, and is Metric the only system that you guys are looking at as far as making suggestions around?
Yeah. Sorry, we're bridging onto the other topic again a little bit, but I guess it's relevant. So no, it's not the only system. It's to allow for that type of flexibility. I mean, Indiana has required QR codes to go directly back to people's lab reports, right? So that's one way that they're helping to mitigate this issue. And so, to provide that batch traceability without putting it into a track and trace system. So that's how they've done it. But it's also a lot of work to manage those programs. So there's different stabs being taken in different directions. Metric is not the only way to track and trace stuff. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. There's pros and cons to that system. There's overlapping benefits and with GMP as well. So it's not just those two programs, but those are the two kind of highlight programs that we're talking about. But yeah, the budget has already been underway for the state reference laboratory to be approved through the ODA, as I understand, or it's well underway. So that's why I bring it up as well, is because this is a program that's already in the works. And I think that there's a lot of merit to it. And I think it's a solution to a lot of the problems that we have for the lack of enforcement in the industry for best practices.
One more quick, so on the secret shopper style method, would it not be easier or maybe more where you don't necessarily have to hide who's coming in versus just a lab representative coming in and pulling a sample and, kind of going that route instead of having to do the whole, for a minor decoy type of thing, a secret kind of makes sense. But I think for just generally pulling, it seems like.
Yeah, you don't really have to wear a mask if you're going to go into a Fred Meyer or something and buy, it's secret just because you're not announcing it. It's not like you're really fooling anybody. You're not buying, you're just buying product and having it tested.
Okay.
Little less like when I was a waitress and some 19-year-old would come in with a fake ID or something like that, Not that kind of secret shopper program, but yeah, it's a product program.
Okay.
And then normally we do not allow questions from outside. However, Eric is our next presenter, so I'm going to recognize you, Eric. Go ahead.
Hi there, Eric Went with Greenleaf Labs. Just wanted to comment on the reference lab and or secret shopper program. We operate a facility in Sacramento, California. They did implement a reference laboratory that the state operates, as well as a kind of shelf audit, more or less secret shopper program. But I don't know that it's specifically exclusive to retail environments. They also have the ability to collect a sample at a licensee. And then they test it at their reference laboratory site. That's proven pretty helpful for a variety of reasons. It cuts out the ambiguity between supply chain, what was sampled by the lab versus what ends up in a retail environment, just to ensure that that's the same product. It also provided some insight and context for folks who were struggling with microbial contaminations. Additionally, they have put up for public comment a reference method for cannabinoid testing that every lab in the state's going to have to use. I think in theory it's a good idea. It does add, or in theory it will produce consistency, but they designed the method without a lot of experience in the diversity of products that are on the marketplace, as well as as well as approaching something from a production facility versus a like research application. And so while their recommendation may be a pretty analytically robust option, it does not take into account doing 100 samples a day instead of 4 samples a day. So there are pluses and minuses. If it goes through as it is, it will add substantial bottlenecking to the process, and not only raise the cost of testing, but also increase turnaround time for licensees. So I see positives on both directions, especially on the reference side, primarily because the state's the one operating and performing all the not only sampling but analyses. And I'm in general in favor of a standardization in methodology, but as long as there's some balance there, we've been doing this since 2011. We have a lot of experience in this industry, and so feel very positive about the systems that we've put in place and developed over the years, and then having to change them to something that's inferior in certain aspects will be a little bit tough to swallow. But in general, the reference lab and the secret shopper has worked out well in California, as far as we can tell. Thank you.
So trying to see if my stuff, my questions actually got answered or not. So when you talked about the inconsistencies, is it of the plant? Is it of the final product? Which level is the inconsistencies that a secret shopper wouldn't help in a field? What about the consistencies of plants and such like that? The whole idea of having hemp tested is that we're seeing it's not high THC, right? And so does that matter in batches? Does that matter in little portions? With the metric tracing, we know it's costly, but from my standpoint as a not a regulator, as a legislator, is how am I being efficient with state funds? How am I looking at, we have 3 systems, and do they hold everybody in the plant to the same standard, or is one getting an advantage of the other? Because that's what we've seen abused in our area in the last few years is, okay, everybody in the world got a medical card and was medical for a long time. Amazingly, when rec went legal, we don't have as many medical cards anymore. And so then you have some legitimate medical people trying to get things through. But then all of a sudden everybody's got hemp licenses and they're growing hemp, but amazingly none of it's staying in the Oregon market. And then now there's hardly any hemp licenses left in certain areas. So wanting to make sure that we have consistencies across the 3 so that we're protecting our licensed good growers, our people that are in those industries trying to do well, and there's not a loophole in one of the other ones. So I'll let that go back to you, Kelly.
Oh man, that was a lot. Rep Morgan, do you want to pick one to start with? We can. I hear you. I think there's a lot we're talking about here. The inconsistencies, we're talking about a few different things. So let's just kind of break it down, right? We talk about a lot of the people on this call are concerned about lab testing inconsistencies, right? And then Rep Morgan, you're talking about the farmer, the processor, and the manufacturer. Where do we put the onus of responsibility for a lot of this? Right now, a lot of states are allowing for work in progress, to be its own category for allowances of higher THC, because as they continue to process the plant from hemp, even if it is 0.3% or below, all the way to final product, we do see that sometimes there's higher or lower THCs, and that might be transferred to another handler, right, with a high THC, and it has a more allowable. So I think, and y'all are welcome to tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think that the emphasis on the product that's being sold to the consumer, the final product, testing in field, of course, to verify that it is in fact hemp, which is a program that's instilled and managed by the ODA, which is going well, right, in hemp in the field. But now we're talking about oils and extracts, which essentially are ingredients that go into final products. And whatever the final product is, and this is how it's laid out in the OLCC regulations and the OHA regs, is like whatever the final product is where we put the onus of responsibility for managing all the testing and best practices. So one, in terms of like which category needs to have the emphasis, I would say final product category, which could be anything, right? Which could be any level of the supply chain. And that's where we would be pulling products is final product category. And then secondly, in terms of the lab inconsistencies, it's just that we need some check of enforcement on that. And we don't really have any. I have suggestions for requiring certain pieces of information to be on lab reports, as well as requiring, certain proficiency levels to be adhered to and validation practices. But then also the secret shopper program and reference laboratory will help to also just keep them ethical. I mean, there's can you do it well? And then it's like, can you do it well when no one's looking, right? And so addressing your question about which level of the supply chain do we do a secret shopper program on, whatever it is, that's the end product to the consumer, right? And then in reference to how do we create more consistencies among laboratories, as Eric said, maybe the standardized method isn't the way to go. It's a bit limiting, but to validate the processes and the proficiencies there, you're never going to have a cause to do that unless we have some sort of program where we can highlight where there's outliers through data and see that that's an issue there. So hopefully that answered those two questions. In regards to the state's money and things like that, hemp operators do want to operate as a free commodity, as a free trade commodity. And I think that allowing them to do so and giving them their own practice management tools will not only help integrate them into a much, much larger global hemp community, but it will take a lot of the resources out of your pockets, right? And you can use them for something hopefully much better and more useful, this reference laboratory or something, as opposed to micromanaging every gram of hemp product that goes in and out of Oregon. So those are the answers to your three questions, I believe, but let me know if I missed anything.
I appreciate that. Mr. Hobbs, just so you know, we're not, the public isn't allowed to ask questions through this. You can email questions to Amanda or myself. Otherwise, it has to be one of the task force members. Brent, you're up next, and then Eric.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Rep. Morgan. I think while we're on topic, I appreciate the input, but just back thoughts of like what we actually are moving towards. I agree with you. I think thinking about how many tests could potentially be pulled from store shelves on some kind of secret shopper. I think what we have set in OLCC now, especially with the new hemp language from 3000, where basically if we want to make a hemp product in an OLCC facility, we have the ability to do that. And we have a holding pattern where the agency can come in and make sure we have no THC in the product that we're going to be potentially shipping out. So it seems to me it makes more sense to maybe not spend the money to go out to all the minute markets as much as just going to the registered now, what will be registered processing facilities that make these products and start there on pulling samples, and especially, maybe some language where there's going to be so much for us in the OLCC. It makes sense where we have one more step of making sure that, holding things for a little bit longer than what a hemp company will probably want to do shipping out. But at least having that ability where there's, potentially random products pulled at those manufacturers may make more sense on a state budget standpoint than trying to send out secret shoppers all over the state to what could end up being thousands of retailers carrying these type of products. So that would be my 2 cents on how to save money on that.
Well, and I guess from my standpoint, if a lab is registered, the margin of error needs to be small. It needs to be consistent and certified. And otherwise, what's the standards of having a lab? If you can't send a product and every time you test it, you get the same result with the same product. And the only variance should be if there's other products, they should each individually have a response. So I appreciate that. Brent, did you have more because your hand's still up?
Oh, well, I would just say to that, yeah, I mean, there is dealing with labs as long as I have. I mean, we've dealt with Greenleaf and many of the labs in the state, or probably a good portion of them. And finding consistency is easier than it sounds, I think, in what's happening. We definitely have bad actors out there. Some of the results we see are just ridiculous on products. So there definitely needs to be some tightening on that. But overall, the lab can't be responsible for potential bad actors in the production side. So the lab may give out a good result. That doesn't necessarily relate to what's actually going to get into the packages and shipped out. So I would just say, yeah, we need to hold the labs accountable and have some kind of consistency. 100% agree with that, but it doesn't end there. Those lab results can be used in a number of ways once they get to the production facility, which batch actually goes out, that kind of tracking, so that we can, have some oversight over. It's the only way to make sure the public isn't going to get something that the lab thought that they approved, essentially, right?
All right, Eric, I have your hand up. I know we're going to be going next to you for presentation as well. So I didn't know if it was wrapping up this conversation or moving on to the next. So I'll call on you.
Thank you, Eric with Greenleaf. Just wanted to comment, that in terms of track and trace or some sort of track system, I think the bigger, hurdle at this moment in time is that anyone making like hemp product in Oregon that might leave the state, there isn't really any sort of enforcement and or requirement in regards to testing that material. At least as far as we see, that's people will send in just a single sample R&D and say, hey, my product is good. This was the sample that I wanted tested, and then they'll sell it to out of state or anywhere else that can use a single data point to say, yeah, hey, my product is good and meets, hey, potential buyer, here's all the information you need. And so there isn't really anything preventing those customers from adhering to existing OIR regulatory rules in regards to testing. That wouldn't necessarily require them to exist within the metric system from a track and trace perspective. But if they were complying and following existing OIR rule with regards to the testing that licensed cannabis licensees have to follow, that could be implemented or required, I guess, as part of existing rule. And so it wouldn't even necessarily mean a track and trace system, but they could, follow existing testing requirements for similar product types, or cannabis versus hemp be kind of grouped into the same category. And it would go a long way to ensuring the product that is made in the state is meeting same requirements that's being sold in the state, not just leaving the state.
I have something to say to that, if that's okay. I think you're right. The OHA has the same regs outlined, like how many samples per batch, and you're right, self-submitted samples are not representative typically of the batch, which is a big issue in testing in general. They say like most testing variance comes not from the different methods, but from the different sampling and preparation techniques that the labs have. So that's a piece of it. But, we have a lot of clients that are here in Oregon that are GMP, and they do comply to OHA regulations. Okay, so they are doing batch testing. They're meeting action levels for solvents and pesticides. They're testing above and beyond what's required in Oregon in order to sell into California and New York markets and Colorado markets, because frankly, we don't have the most robust testing set out for our products out there. And so they're going above and beyond, but the only people that are doing this are the GMP people, because like the basis of it is that you have to be compliant in order to move forward. Like first checklist on CGMP is like local compliance trumps your testing practices. And so the clients that we have that are doing great and that are exporting and working internationally and vertically integrated, and they're complying with OHA regulations. And all you'd have to do is ask them to show you their batch records, and they could show you all the batch records of all the testing that they've gotten per test. I will say that they're still doing self-submitted samples. I don't think anybody's doing, on-site sampling. It's very rare to see anybody in the hemp industry getting on-site sampling done, but they are doing representative sampling, which is part of the training of CGMP. So it's like taking off the training wheels of track and trace and giving them the opportunity to self-regulate has actually increased the amount of testing and best practices that we've seen in companies that are doing it right. And what that's given them has been market access. They do this to get an edge in the market, to be able to sell into these different areas, to be able to comply with retailer requirements or broker requirements and things like that. And so compliance within the state of production is a staple of those programs. And the lack of enforcement is why people aren't doing it. It's already outlined. It's already there. The people that are doing it are the GMP people, but the lack of enforcement is why there's not a lot of companies complying in general. And that's why we've suggested a check system where it's saying, hey, we don't have to micromanage all your paperwork and batch records, but we are going to check that you're doing this right. And when we check it, you better have all of your batch records together, because when we go through it, if there's not something, you're going to pay the state of Oregon a bunch of money. And so that's where I think it is outlined. It's all there. It's all just ready to be implemented. We just need to have some sort of enforcement capabilities, but track and trace isn't necessarily going to enhance the safety of the product.
Thank you, Kelly. Any other questions for Kelly? And anybody from the public, I would ask that you email Amanda Borup, and she'll get that to us that we can address. So thank you for that. I see no other questions, so I'm going to move on to Eric and for your portion of presentation. Thank you, Eric.
Eric with Greenleaf Lab. Thanks. I think, when Amanda asked me to be present today, I thought we were just doing a question answer in a contribution sort of way. So
I'm expecting a 20-page PowerPoint. Just kidding.
If I would have known, I would have prepared. That's okay. I think that, one of the things that we see at our facility is that, we have a couple of clients that, similar to Kelly said, that do follow all of the, existing regulatory schemes. But for the most part, the vast majority don't. And so, I'll be honest, we rarely encounter anything that falls into a category of containing THC when it shouldn't. That's a pretty rare event. But we do regularly see things that claim to be something or have a certain amount of something in it that don't. And again, in terms of finished, infused, or manufactured goods, by the time, things get to that level, if there was THC present in the bulk material or the plant material, it's, been processed out or so low that is not present any longer. So that's a fairly rare occurrence in terms of ensuring that there's no THC in a finished good. The thing that we see quite often is it's claiming to be X and it ends up being Y, where it's not really accurate compared to what the label is saying or what they intended to be. But the fact that they don't really have to do that testing means that those products are still ending out into the marketplace. And so, if the goal is to prevent intoxicants from entering the marketplace, I'm sure that is occurring in some small corner of the area in terms of finished product. But I think the bigger case is that there's stuff going out there that doesn't have any of the things that it says that it has. And is that a consumer safety standpoint? Possibly. But is it a consumer protection to make sure that they're getting what that they say that they're getting? That might be a different conversation.
That is one of the biggest things that we are concerned about is I've had local people tell me they were handed a product that said hemp and they were high as a kite for a couple days and weren't expecting that outcome. Something you can get off the shelf and it wasn't labeled as such. So knowing that what is being purchased, that the labeling is accurate, that the testing for is showing that what is on the label is accurate for consumer safety. There's also the Delta H component. In Oregon, it's banned. And so knowing that the safety component of product is just that's the biggest thing. Is labeling accurate? Is the testing consistent with what the labeling says? I think, and I could be wrong. But that's what we've talked about. And
Yeah.
I know Brent has his hand up too. Might have a question for you.
Sure, go ahead, Brent.
And Brent, you're muted.
Sorry. I think Eric's right. I mean, I have a few things for him. I think he may hit on in a minute, but as far as are we concerned beyond THC being in these products, is the intent of potential rules being also that we are trying to hold, there are a lot of fake products out there, a lot of placebos being given out, gummies that don't have any CBD in them that are being sold online. We've gotten stuff and tested it and found out there's nothing in it. So is there interest here perhaps to have something as far as beyond THC value or any type of intoxicant, just to hold product manufacturers to what they say as far as what's in those products when we do some kind of spot check on products? Or are we simply working on intoxicants? I mean, I guess it's a question for you, Rep. I don't know what you think on that, but there's a lot of fake stuff being sold. And is that something we're going to try and deal with, or are we just going to stay on the intoxicant level?
I think that, that's a good point, is that and it's a valid point on both sides, and that the implementation of existing testing requirements to people who are manufacturing goods in the state would, if they were doing the testing, just like in an OLCC license application, if you're doing testing and the material, the product itself doesn't match the label claims that are being presented, that product's not passing. Granted, when that enters into the state's seed-to-sale tracking system, like that is a whole big thing where it gets flagged, and then the label claim, and then they have to repackage, yada, 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 or reformulate. The fact that if the testing was required, you would be catching both the intoxicant and the things that weren't claiming, that didn't have what they claimed to be. So things that were not matching label claim in regards to whatever active ingredient that they are, whether that's a cannabinoid or, other things that may or may not be intoxicant that would fall into a panel that we would be testing for. And it would be, if it was sampled by the laboratory and following existing OIR regulatory scheme, you would not only catch those samples or that material, the COA and the test results that were generated would provide that producer, processor with the information that, hey, this batch of product isn't meeting your, own label claims and such. How that then gets enforced, I guess that's the question for what that enforcement would look like without a seed-to-sale tracking system.
Courtney?
Yes, thank you so much. So based on Eric's last comments and Brent's questions, it leads to my question of what really is our intent here? What is our specific goal? And what I believe our goal is public safety, right? And making sure the products that are hitting the market, both in the general market and within the dispensary system, are safe for consumers. Not just to know what products are where, which is what I understand more of the track and trace is just going to provide what products are where. It really isn't going to provide that level of public safety and awareness that I think is what we really want to achieve here. And, we've already identified the gap of needing the labeling and packaging, which I'm glad we've identified. And I believe that's going to be one of the key recommendations going back to the legislature. But I think the conversations need to be geared toward what steps do we need to take to ensure that these products that are hitting the market are safe? So is it, this reference lab? Is it modifications to testing methodologies, things like that? A CGMP type program or something like that? What is really going to get to that public safety? And maybe just as a subcommittee, we can very clearly identify what our intent is so that we're all on the same page. Because I don't know if that's been very clearly identified just based off of the last comments that I'm hearing.
I think we are the subcommittee. So I don't think they're going to have us do a subcommittee of a subcommittee. I think that's something we have to figure out. So it's really good points. It's valid, Courtney. I appreciate that. And I think that's part of why the conversation has kind of gone the way it has the last few meetings is, if we go back to the original question is what we currently have in legislation working? Is there more legislation needed? Where are the gaps that need to be covered? And that's what we're supposed to identify. We've identified, as you've correctly addressed, that labeling and packaging is a huge concern. But as Brent just said, hadn't even thought about that labeling and packaging the opposite way, almost on a fraudulent basis, right? That somebody's claiming to have something they don't. And then does that matter? What's the level of standard to do that? Who enforces that? When up till now, Oregon has been OLCC does the rec, OHA does the medical, ODA does the hemp farm bill, and labeling enforcement's kind of under those hats for whatever portion. But really, what is the impact? Do we regulate that if somebody claims it has something and has nothing? Is that FDA? I mean, who does that, right? Who's responsible for a consumed product that claims to have something that doesn't? But ultimately, public safety is the concern, and protection of. We've gone from. I mean, I'm in the heart of the growing in the state of Oregon. I mean, to live in Southern Oregon my whole life, and I'm closer to 50 than any other number right now. It's kind of one of those things that I've been in the heart of the growing. I've seen all the things that it offers. How do we have the legitimate business industries, economic development, all those things that protect the legitimate industries? And so I guess I'd ask you, I'll flip it back on you guys as subcommittee members. What does this need to cover? And Courtney, your hand's still up, so I'll start with you, then Brent.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I didn't mean another subcommittee. I meant this subcommittee of really clearly defining intent. And so I agree with you. I think it has to be public safety. I don't think tracking to know where products are, I don't think there's really value in that. I think the value is ensuring that we know what's happening in the manufacturing facilities, ensuring that that labeling and packaging is accurate, that they aren't making false claims, and what they do put on there, is accurate, and whatever steps we need to put in place. I think Kelly had some good ideas. I think Eric probably has some more ideas if we could give him some more time on what that looks like. And the other piece that I wanted to bring up too, and based on some of the other comments, is that this really has to apply. It can't just be about the Oregon manufacturers, what they're making here, whether they're selling them in and out of state, especially the ones that are selling the products in state. It has to be anyone selling into the state, right? There has to be uniformity across the board. Otherwise, it doesn't matter, right? Otherwise, regulating just our manufacturers isn't going to accomplish that goal, because people are selling this from who knows where in the world, right? Coming from other places that they're selling online. So whatever policies we do recommend and put in place, they have to apply across the board. And the testing rules, the testing statutory authority and the rules that we put in place all these years, yes, there's been lack of enforcement, but they have always been intended and specifically say they have to apply to anyone selling in the state. And so that intention has been there. It's just, how do we carry that out now that we're talking more about the enforcement piece, and then making sure that these other checks and balances that we're putting in place that those are very clearly applying uniformly across the board to anyone bringing products into our state.
I'll go to Brent and then go back.
I think Courtney and I are on the same page on this one. I think if I'm going to officially recommend something from the subcommittee.
Wait. Well, let's mark this on the calendar. Just kidding.
Yep.
Go ahead.
We actually agree on a bunch of stuff. I got to tell you, I appreciate Courtney always. But I think the out-of-state piece comes back to how are we going to, that comes back to the secret shopper, right? Because we're not going to have those base camps here to go pull samples from. So that creates some questions there. But overall, I think I know personally, I've spent hundreds of hours working with OLCC and state regulators on making sure that what we make in the OLCC system is what we say we're making, and what goes out to the customer, they can feel secure when they go to a dispensary and buy a product that what's on that label is what's in there. We can't make false claims about healing. We can't, any of those kind of things we would be forced to change. We can't say on our label that you're going to lose weight if you eat this certain product or any of that. And I think FDA is going to fall dramatically short on anything that's not directly regulated through them. We see it on TV every day, false claims on all kinds of products that probably don't do much for you. So I think if I had a choice, as far as what we do in Oregon, we have done such a good job of setting the standard for product production and oversight with the OLCC's lead. I think doing the same thing with hemp products and feeling good about what comes into the state, as Courtney said, and what we're sending out of the state is actually what it says on the label, and consumers can feel safe about that. What other states do, obviously, is up to them, but I think for us, I think it should be on the table. I think we should be looking at how to make sure that if somebody orders a CBD product and they want to give their child for whatever illness, or they're actually trying to use CBD the way it's meant to be used, that what we're doing in Oregon is truthful and they can count on that product being what it says it is. So that's my 2 bits on it.
So I will go to you, Stephen, just next. One thing I wanted to add to that. So I want to be intentional that for me, track and trace is a part of the label and packaging conversation. That if the tracking, now at what level, we have to talk about that. We haven't determined that, but part of that idea was I have this label and I can scan that and I know where that product came from, and because of the tracking and tracing. And the other piece is, how does the process of, with the world of online, how do you regulate what's coming into Oregon? I mean, I have a letter here I sat down a few minutes ago. I was listening to you guys from somebody who says, I buy this product from China online and it's like a legal heroin, blah, 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 blah. And you guys need to regulate this. Another topic, another day. But I mean, again, in the world of online, what can you get from anywhere? But product safety, that we have a consistency of what is being sold in the Oregon market under the label, that we're protecting our manufacturers and producers and all that other kind of stuff. But also the consistency that we just know. We started off with saying our goal isn't to say everything's outlawed. Our goal was to make sure that what is produced is safe, and we know that what the packaging says is what it says it is. And so kind of going there. So Stephen, Crowley, and then Kelly. And Stephen, you got the cursive mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Rep. Morgan. I just wanted to underscore something that Courtney said, that there are testing requirements in place for products sold in Oregon that are spelled out pretty robustly in statute and an ODA rule. And, labeling to go along with that certainly makes that more digestible to consumers, clearer to understand. But, the bottom line is there are a lot of products out there where it is not clear at all that they are complying with the current testing requirements that are already in place. So, for that part of the conversation, I think it's worthwhile to think about what enforcement can and should look like on that side of things, because those requirements are in place, but we've heard from labs about the self-selecting of samples and things that clearly fall outside of what's required for products sold in Oregon.
Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, this is so productive. Great. There are regs out there, and so it is in place. You're like, is it broken? Rep Morgan, you said, is this broken, and do we need to fix it? Right. That was kind of the intent of your original statement here, and so it's outlined, as Stephen just said, and it's difficult to regulate. What we can regulate is what's made in Oregon and what's sold in Oregon, right? And like the labeling of how it's sold in Oregon. And a lot of work has been done there. The ability to match label claims requires companies to go through a lot. They have to vet their vendors. They have to test against their ingredients. They have to make sure that all of their products are clean and safe. They have to make sure that all of their employees are trained on consistent SOPs to provide consistency in their product. They have to make sure that they're complying with labeling regulations. They have to make sure that they have batch traceability for everything in case they have a recall. So all of these things are how you make sure that you meet product label claims. You run R&D, you do small batches of production, you check those numbers against each other, and you finally make your label claim, right, through formulations and produce a product. And the labels have to comply. That's how we sell it in Oregon. But you don't have, all of those things to create a good label claim and to match your label claims and be compliant, all those tiny little detailed steps along the way that accumulate into a quality product, that's all a certification. That's literally a certification of, are you training your employees? Do you have a clean facility? You have batch records, all this kind of stuff. In Oregon, we have that with OLCC and a combination of like the food safety licensing for anybody that's making food products in Oregon. So again, it's like, if you're making food products in Oregon, you have to have a food safety license. It's kind of a similar ideal. But it's not just testing those products to make sure they're meeting the label. It's like, to ensure that that's done by a company, it has to start at the very, very beginning of like the outline of their program. You can't regulate it at that final product of production. So without going through and micromanaging the process of each business, you allow flexibility for them to have the best practices that are focused around safety with giving variance for their product efficacy. Products are better than others and worse than some, and this is a capitalistic market. You make a good product out there, hopefully that's a good thing and it's clean and compliant. Those are the goals. Some people make better products than others. You can't say like, we can't eliminate the fact that people are going to miss label claims sometimes. That's going to happen. But what you can regulate is that everybody has batch traceability, that everybody's meeting certain certification requirements, that everybody has the safety and training needed to operate in this type of facility. And so that's what we can regulate. We can regulate when it's made here and when it's sold here, but we can't really regulate the internet right now, which makes it really, really tough. And so, my thought process on that is that the gap is in the enforcement of that and where we do the checks and balances. So the answer is like, well, let's just slap it into track and trace, right? Which is one of the solutions to this problem of people not complying with the already laid out regulations that are enforced there. But if there is some sort of check to it that's much more in line with what other states and countries are doing, and what interstate trade is expecting out of their manufacturers, allowing a little bit more flexibility in the program, then we should be able to see a variety of quality in the products, but knowing that they're safe. That's where we fix the gap in what we have, is that we need people to know that they're being looked at. Do they need to be handheld from start to finish like the cannabis industry? That's up to you guys, but I think it's a regression, and I think that there's a way to ensure safe products if the companies are complying with best practices for manufacturing. So that's I think where we can regulate.
Okay, so it's been a very fun conversation. I appreciate that. Looking at time, I want to kind of look at the agenda that Amanda sent out. These are topics that that lend to the questions that are here. What portions of secondary market supply chain should be licensed is kind of one of the next topics. Our additional resources related to that, some type of track and trace. There's several bullet points here. I might actually, I'm looking at, do we take them out of order and go to where the conversations have been? So, all right, I'm gonna, if you guys have the agenda in front of you, based on this conversation, I'm gonna hop to kind of the last 3 bullet points first, and then we'll go back up unless we need it. Let's go anywhere. If you have the agenda, you see the questions that are listed there. Is some type of track and trace system needed for import, export, wholesale of bulk cannabinoid hemp materials? Is that some type of track and trace system needed for finished products to associate test results to batches and labels? And for each of these, should it be a single source for maintaining data like CTS, or would GMP or GMP-like record keeping requirements be adequate? If the latter, how should business failing to keep adequately traceable records be handled? So I think both labs have brought up these topics today. We've had this as part of our conversation. So I would ask task force members to jump into this. And if we have questions, I don't know, Eric and Kelly, if you're available for us to kind of throw any questions at you in that process. And so I would throw this back to our task force members of those questions. Let's start with the first one. Import, export, wholesale of bulk cannabinoid hemp materials. Is there a track and trace system needed for that?
This is Andre. My question would be, are the hemp batches logged into metric as they're tested for potency? I mean, hemp has to be tested for potency anyway. And the track and trace would be if those lab results for hemp are put into metric.
You know what? I didn't catch the question on Andre. Amanda Borup, go ahead.
I was going to say, just for clarity, so just to kind of, I think, speak to Andre's question. So currently in the track and trace system, it has the capability to attach test results to a batch or to products. So and a certificate of analysis is also uploaded at that time to verify that, the testing results entered into the system and the certificate are both there. So everybody can have full view of those testing results.
Yeah, and that would be I mean, I'm not knowledgeable about like the hemp testing process. So that would be for hemp as well, hemp products. So that certificate of analysis is available in metric for hemp products that are tested? No. Okay. Well,
hemp generally hemp product.
If that's if that's the answer, I think that, yeah, then maybe if you want some more regulatory control, then you would want to include those bulk hemp products. At least the test results being tracked, I don't know about the whole life cycle of the product. That seems a bit burdensome and costly, but if you want to know about a particular hemp product's test results, then maybe it should be included in metric.
I appreciate that, Andre. In order of the hands I have Amanda Metzler and then Brent, but I also see Director Mark, so I'm waiting to see if he's actually putting his hand up or just kind of smiling at us. So.
Looks like he's eating lunch. Is what it looks like.
Representative Morgan, Amanda Metzler. Sorry. Apologies for getting here late. I'll listen as the order of hands, and sorry I had a matter come up. I've been listening in, but I had to do a couple other things, so apologize.
No worries, Director. Go ahead, Amanda.
I as well apologize for being late, Representative Morgan. I wanted to advocate for having the track and trace system for hemp as well, through, if it's not metric, another system that OLCC would go to. There is an RFP that's going to be going out for not only Metric, but other trace and track and trace programs, that this is the perfect time to be able to incorporate hemp into it from the beginning if they need to be able to have certain features, you know, to be able to move it out of Metric out of state. We would be able to make some of those changes right now in the new proposal.
Brent?
Yeah, I agree with Amanda on that. I think to Andre's point, I think we should add it to some type of tracking system, and the testing of the bulk product before it goes out is sufficient on as far as the farm side goes to be able to track those batches and what product is actually going out, but also certainly the products to be in some type of tracking system to be traced back for any kind of problems with the general public receiving those would be a good idea. So I'd be all for, I mean, Metric at this point, if we happen to change systems or something comes up, the new system, but right now it seems Metric would be probably most appropriate.
Well, and I guess my response is knowing that OLCC is going out to RFP, that whatever we do, we just be consistent between the industries. I think it's appropriate that if we have a track and tracing program in Oregon, that everybody's in the same track and tracing, whichever company that be. Director Marks, and then I'll jump back in the list.
So I want to be clear about where we're at with Metric, because we're not necessarily going to RFP directly. We're going to take a look at an RFI and see what's out there. That's a requisite for moving through a procurement, either a continuing procurement with Metric in the future, if that's, you know, something that justifies, or to open it up to a full procurement. So we intend to do and work on creating an RFI and working with the industry on what the requirements are that we want for our next iteration of Metric or next iteration of a cannabis tracking system from any provider. So just to remind the committee, I know you know this, but I deal with this a lot. There are really three things we're dealing with Metric right now as an agency. One is getting rid of tags and going to batch tracking. There's a financial issue there, right, about how we pay Metric, and then they come back to a budgetary issue that we need to work with. That's moving forward in rulemaking, and we'll have a proposal look at it. Then there's what we're discussing here. Is Metric, or does the state of Oregon at least want to put in any tracking system requirement for hemp, and how you on-ramp that on, and what level does that take place? Items for human consumption, bulk items finally tested, maybe going out of state with some receiving states notification. And then last is sort of that, what process are we going to use in the end to go through? Because it takes us about a year to stage gate for procurement. It's not easy. We're going to have to justify all that. So that piece goes on. The contract technically ends in September 2025. So complicated when you talk about Metric and what's there and what system we're going to be on. We're on the track to have all of those discussions now and make that work. So not an RFI right now is what we're talking about, and that's preliminary for us. Thanks.
Thank you,
and I'll
Director
just say,
Marks.
I think people know, right? I really do think we need final product testing at some batch that makes sense for hemp, and some track and trace of those bulk items out of state and with a destination and a notification if we can supply that. I think that really boosts interstate commerce and gives certainty to the products out there for the, you know, the stalwart hemp producers that want quality products out there and known, and it'll help us accomplish that goal for the interstate commerce side of the equation.
I have Matt Cyrus.
Yeah, thanks, Rep. Couple questions I have is the intent to make Oregon's hemp industry less competitive with the rest of the world economy, or are we looking for safe products? Because if we're looking for safe products, then I think we need to go back to what was first discussed at the beginning of this meeting, and that's a shopper program, tracking the products, tracking the safety, making sure the labels are accurate, etc. If you're going to go to track and trace on everything we're doing in Oregon, are we intending to track and apply the same to every product coming into Oregon? Or is it strictly to put Oregon's producers at a disadvantage? Because unless you're going to put every product that's on a shelf at Bimart through this whole same process, then you put Oregon's manufacturers and processors at a significant market disadvantage, and you basically ruin Oregon's hemp industry. So I guess that's if you're looking at for some basic tracking, maybe you call it metric light. That might be something to take a look at. I know, but ODA currently has different programs set up to track everything from grass seed to, seed potatoes or whatever in a whole different form. But if you dictate the metric type system, then, like you say, unless you're going to do every product on the market, you put Oregon's producers at a disadvantage.
I appreciate that, Matt. I guess it is a tough one for me, being that so many in Southern Oregon were utilizing hemp licenses to avoid the regulation of the OLCC market, or to avoid the having to keep product in Oregon to transfer high THC out of the state. I know that we've seen less of that with less hemp licensees. And so we have people that are, but I guess my first response is House Bill 3000 called for in rulemaking hemp to be tracked and traced and tested. So that was already passed last year. The idea is not to put the hemp industry out, but it's for accountability that we're actually growing hemp versus hiding behind a hemp license to usurp the OLCC or the federal laws regarding the Farm Bill. So we have to find a balance of how to do that. But what we're doing today isn't increasing regulation that wasn't already passed last year. And we're just trying to figure out the nuance of how do we do that still protects our licensees, our manufacturer producers, but also has accountability in the system. It is a tough balance. And where do we find that place where one more thing is too much to tip the scales, as far as being able to do that? That's what we're trying to figure out. That's why we're asking the questions of the what. But House Bill 3000 called for this already. Matter of fact, that was one of the things that we asked ODA to say is, where are you at in the testing of products? Where are you at in the tracing or tracking and all that other kind of stuff? And it's in rulemaking, or it's not quite yet, or something. So anyhow, that's my first response to what you're saying is us trying to find that balance. But the intent was already passed in law last year to implement that. So trying to find a way to do it right.
And I recognize that, and I guess my understanding with the task force was to take a look at recommendations for legislation for this year. And I guess maybe this might be an area we may want to reconsider or readdress how it's implemented. Because if you're not going to apply the same rules to every product sold in the state, then you put Oregon's producers at a disadvantage.
I appreciate that. I think I heard recommendation today was that everything sold in Oregon's under the same regulation, no matter where it came from. So I heard Kelly say that. I heard Brent say that. I'm pretty sure that's what we heard today, is that if it's sold in Oregon, it's under the same requirements, period, ish. So what are those nuances? Okay, Kelly, your hand was up next. And just for time's sake, I know we got about 10 minutes left. So we didn't actually get to all the bullet points, but we're having some good dialogue.
Very quickly, you said products coming in out of state. So right now there's a requirement where they have to be tested by a equivalent laboratory, like a ORLAP equivalent certified laboratory, like a state certified laboratory, essentially from where the product is coming from, to the same testing standards that are in Oregon, right? So that is in place right now, is that anything being imported from out of state has to be tested to the same standards and has to be tested by an equivalent certified laboratory. So I just want to throw that in there because that is in the language, but again, it's not enforced, right? So that's the missing piece there. But that is kind of how they adjust for all the products coming in over state as well. And I just wanted to also comment just on the work in progress, you know, because putting the emphasis on the final product that's going to consumers is really important. Stephen mentioned it earlier as well. Final product testing is really important to focus on that with hemp because that's what's going to consumers. There are products in process that do have higher levels of THC. You know, they can create this like crude like substance, and oftentimes that's rich with cannabinoids, all different types of stuff. It goes into further processing for final product integration where they take out other contaminants as well as other cannabinoids. So, you know, those products might come into the state at a higher level of THC, but they're really looking for the safety testing at that level of processing. So there is something in place for that. It's not something that has any, you know, there's no check for that. There's no check and balance for that. If there was a requirement for companies to manage their own batch traceability records and meet those, and they got audited and that was found that they had imported a product that was only tested to Arizona's standards or something like that by a non-certified testing laboratory, that would be cause for them to get in a lot of trouble for disobeying that quality parameter. Essentially, if they don't have that, they would have to test again with a lab in the state of Oregon just to test against their products. But most companies that are GMP or handling their own batch traceability are testing against their COAs because they don't trust the labs that they're coming from in Colorado or whatever either. So they'll be like, oh, we need to retest this to make sure it meets specifications. So just so you know that that's in place. In terms of stuff coming in from out of state, there is language around that, and also that the work, the in-process material needs to be treated differently than the final products. And then lastly, Brett Morgan, you talked about, you know, the track and trace system being extremely important at the agricultural level to define hemp versus marijuana. Again, we're kind of partitioning this out through the supply chain. That's a very distinct category of agricultural level of crops to verify it's not marijuana, which does need to be reported to the state if tested otherwise, and that is sampled on site. So I do think we have a good like environmental program for ensuring that it's not marijuana, so long as those farms are even testing. I mean, a lot of the Southern Oregon hemp farms that were ousted in the last year, they weren't doing any testing at all. So so that is something to be aware of as well. I think the program is set up to help with the validity of marijuana versus hemp.
Thank you, Kelly. Going to go to Brent and then going to try to get, oh, Eric, I see you brought down your hand. Okay, so Brent, last word.
I just got to say, I fail to see how accountability is a disadvantage to any product manufacturer. The legislature absolutely deemed that we need to keep an eye on these products that are being made in Oregon. We're the leader in the country coming onto this type of stuff. The language that we put into 3000 laid it out where we want more accountability for our product manufacturers than a lot of states care about. We can't keep up on what other states do with it, but it's just dumbfounding to me how it could possibly be a disadvantage to have a free tracking system to keep track of your products in case there's some kind of accident or something happens. The state's providing this tracking system. I don't see how at all it would be a disadvantage unless you're trying to do something, you know, false that other states are getting away with. That's what I hear is we can't get away with the same thing as other states can. That's not what the legislative intent was. It absolutely is about making it happen. I mean, there's cost to everything, but if you're trying to do internal tracking, it's going to cost you either. So, I mean, metric obviously isn't free, but overall, like, of course we need to keep track of it. And we are leading the way in this kind of language. And I think we need to continue to do that.
Wow. Okay. Of course, it's a day that we have a 90-minute meeting, so we don't have a lot of time to talk when it's such in depth. Senator Hansel, go ahead.
I agree with what was just stated. I think that was the intent of the legislature. I know it was my intent on the floor of the Senate when I was working on these bills and agreed to be on this task force. So I just wanted to get that in as well. That what Brent said is where I'm leaning as well.
Thank you, sir. Man, a few words, but he knows what he means. Okay, so I know we probably need to try to find a meeting pretty quick to do the next steps because we need to get past these other ones. And I know we have another meeting coming up. So we're going to try to get a poll out to you guys as quick as possible, find a time that we can kind of continue this conversation. And I really appreciate the depth of dialogue. Thank you, everybody, for engaging so thoroughly. And if you're okay with that, not us going past 12:30, I will just move us to adjournment unless anybody has anything for the good of the whole. I am just looking to make sure there weren't any last minute hands. Eric, Kelly, thank you for being here, part of the conversation. Appreciate you guys taking the time. We have a lot to delve into. It's not a light topic. I'm so glad my colleagues gave me this subcommittee. Woohoo! So anyhow, thank you, everybody, and we will meet soon. Looking forward to the next conversations. For those in the public, please email Amanda and get those questions in so we can see how we can work that into the conversation as well for the task force. Appreciate everybody's participation today. And with that, we will be adjourned at 12:27.